Israeli Minister of Justice Ben-Gvir, he says that if Netanyahu ends the war without an extensive operation in Rafah to defeat Hamas, he doesn't have a mandate to continue serving as prime minister. We've heard that it seems that Israelis are taking out their troops from Gaza. What's your take on the current situation in Gaza?
Well, thanks for having me back on. And first, with regards to Ben-Gvir, his own political survival is at stake here as well. He needs the war to continue. He needs this national emergency to prolong his party and his coalition's power. There's polling that came out just yesterday from the Times of Israel that shows that it's not just Netanyahu's in political trouble. The entire governing coalition is in political trouble. And so if there were elections held today, Ben-Gvir would be out of power. His party will lose seats in the Knesset. And so just as we talk about Netanyahu wanting to prolong this genocide in Gaza, prolong the troubles in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, potentially entering into a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon for his own political needs. We see that with Ben-Gvir as well. So I think a lot of times when Ben-Gvir speaks, he is, using Netanyahu as a mirror for himself, right? So he is articulating his own fears, right? So Netanyahu, you're going to kill us both if you don't keep this thing going. With regards to what we're seeing happen in southern Gaza, it seems as if the IDF did pull the bulk of its ground units out of southern Gaza. So Khan Yunis and Rafah, the two dominant cities in the south. They didn't have troops in Rafah, so you really talking about Khan Yunis. And my appreciation of it, Nima, is that frankly they did all the destroying they were going to do. They have completely destroyed the city of Khan Yunis. Reports are anywhere from 55 to 80% of the buildings have been destroyed. The reports are also all stating that the city is covered in a stench of death because of the thousands of bodies that are beneath the rubble. I know today they said they have pulled 80 bodies out of the rubble. When you look at the video, you say, my God, how could they get any bodies out at all? You have multiple story concrete buildings collapsed without heavy equipment. Those men, women, children who were crushed and buried alive in that rubble, you're not getting them out. So the Israelis did what they set out to do. If you look at his genocide, I think there's two prongs to it, right? A collective punishment and an ethnic cleansing. And the collective punishment of Khan Yunis is complete. The ethnic cleansing part of it is also complete because they've made Khan Yunis unlivable. It's uninhabitable. People can't survive there. So they have also said, Netanyahu said it, and other Israeli government and military officials have made it clear that they will be going into Rafah. And so the reporting that this pullout from Khan Yunis was to prepare for Rafah, there's no reason to doubt that. A lot of spin the last couple of days that's not what that means. And, oh, look, the Biden White House, their tough words are really having an impact on the Israelis. And that's just all nonsense. That's just all spin and messaging and posturing and trying to put lipstick on this pig, that type of thing. I think the conclusion of the destruction of Gaza has this final phase, and the Israelis are not going to let that go. Because even we talk about how unpopular the governing coalition is, Netanyahu's coalition is, how unpopular Netanyahu is. That poll had 71% of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign. They also want to see this campaign, this ethnic cleansing campaign, this genocide carried out. A near identical number a few weeks ago, 68%. So again, 71% of Israelis want to see Netanyahu resign, but 68% of Israelis are also saying we don't want to see food going to the people of Gaza. We want to keep up this blockade. We want to keep up this siege. We want to see them starve. So, you know, both things can be true. The Israelis can be really upset with Netanyahu, and they could also want to see this ethnic cleansing carried out. And I think for the Israelis, the idea is that this is the best opportunity we are going to have to carry out this idea of a greater Israel, to meet our Zionist ambitions. This is the best opportunity we are going to have, and we have to finalize it now. I think after the destruction of Rafah, they continue to make Gaza uninhabitable through their blockade, just continuing to immiserate the people, as well as airstrikes continue, of course, to the point that they're now back in the idea of voluntary migration, right? So we're going to get, when I say voluntary migration, you have to put quotes around those words. This, forced expulsion, basically, of the Palestinians, of the people from Gaza. And this is where that pier, a lot of people have said this, the idea of this pier, the idea of the pier that the U.S. Navy is going to build, or the U.S. military is going to build, it came from supposedly the Israelis themselves back in October. And if folks remember, back in October, there was lots of talk from the Israelis also about voluntary migration, as they call it, right? Again, expulsion, ethnic cleansing. And so the idea being is that you make it so uninhabitable, so unlivable, you make it so traumatic to be there that people will leave. And then the part that works with that is, people also recall that in the $95 billion foreign wars supplemental that the U.S. Senate passed back in February now, I guess, that Speaker Johnson has been sitting on. In that $95 billion is billions of dollars for humanitarian aid. A lot of that is dedicated towards the resettlement of the Palestinian people. So what I suspect has been happening, is that the Israelis are going to Ecuador, say, and they're saying to Ecuador, hey, if you take 100,000 people from Gaza, the Americans will give you $100 million, whatever it would be, and this way they have the opportunity to carry out their ethnic cleansing. You understand, you look at it from the Palestinian point, of course, where they're not going to go along with that. Maybe some will, because the situation is so dire, and how can you ask your family to continue in this? Are you really going to risk seeing your children starve to death, seeing your children die from disease, right? So maybe some will take that opportunity to get out, and you can't blame them. But I think many others will not. How could they do that? How could they dishonor what generations before them have done? How can they dishonor those who died in this genocide by acquiescing to Israel's demands? So there's still a lot to go here. This will be certainly what occurs in the coming months will be no less important than what we've seen in the last 6 months. And unfortunately, we're still going to see a lot more killing and a lot more suffering. And I think a really valiant, and I shouldn't say valiant, a really erstwhile attempt by the Israelis to succeed at this ethnic cleansing.
Matt, we had this attack on Iranian consulate in Syria. Nobody knows what was really behind this type of attack, when it could be a tactic, but it definitely is not a strategy if they do this in Syria. And on the other hand, Netanyahu said, if we get involved in a direct conflict with Hezbollah, we don't need the United States to help us. We know that this is a rhetoric. They would need the United States. Without the United States, they can do nothing. What's your assessment when he's trying to say that we don't need the United States to help us against Iran, against Hezbollah? Do you think he really mean it?
No, he can't mean it unless he has lost grasp of reality, and I can't imagine he has. He's very calculated. You could say a lot about Netanyahu, but one of the things you can't say about him is that he doesn't understand what's occurring. He is incredibly cynical. He's incredibly calculating. He's very smart, and so he's very dangerous. But this action, this bombing of the consulate, and by the way, the Iranians have already opened a new consulate. They sent one of their generals there, and yesterday they had a big ceremony and inaugurated a new consulate. Uh, it does seem, it's hard to understand though, like you were saying. Like, this doesn't make sense. This is incredibly reckless. And so was this the case of one element of the Israeli government, of the Israeli military or the intelligence services? Because I don't know how big of a bomb was used. I don't know if this could have been done by Israeli intelligence drones, or, I'm not really even sure how that delineation occurs in their airstrike capability. But, could this have been where one element of the Israeli war machine carried out this act without others knowing about it, right? So because it comes across as so reckless to do this, the fact that Israel has had to now they closed 17 or 27, I can't remember which, embassies around the world. I mean, this is a big deal. They've really kind of crippled their own diplomatic functioning. They've exposed themselves to retaliation. Was this a calculated gambit then to further the possibility of war with Iran? Right. I mean, so when that Times of Israel poll I was just talking about, Nima, they asked about war. They asked the Israeli public about war with Hezbollah. And 48% of Israelis were in favor of a military campaign against Hezbollah. So half of Israelis are in favor of launching a war into southern Lebanon again, or into all of Lebanon. I mean, and this is on the, they've had two previous wars in Lebanon, both of which have been unmitigated disasters. Hezbollah exists because of their first invasion of Lebanon. I mean, so why? I think third try's a charm, I guess, but maybe that's it. This is a way to push the possibility of war. And then back your question about the Israelis can do it on their own. They can't do it on their own. They don't get they get the bombs from us. They get their spare parts for their aircraft for us. They need the replacement aircraft for us. I mean, they get so much intelligence for us. Plus, they need the economic support from us. I mean, remind people that Israel, the United States, is an unconditional backer of all Israeli loans. So if Israel gets in a position where it needs to borrow loans, it actually just did a big issue of debt a couple months ago. The United States backs all of that, right? I mean, so we've talked about this before. That's like, Nima, you or I having Elon Musk as a co-signer for a car or for a house. You want to get a Lamborghini? No problem, right? Elon's co-signing with us, or Bill Gates is, or whoever your favorite billionaire is, or I mean, so like, but the idea that they could do it without the U.S., that's just absurd. That's just absurd. And if anything, what the idea would be is that they wouldn't just have the U.S. supporting the Israelis, as the U.S. is supporting their genocide in Gaza, but one step further, where something would occur where you'd have U.S. aircraft directly participating, right? So that you'd have U.S. aircraft off of carriers or out of the region, which would be a huge problem. Because how would that be possible? You're gonna have U.S. strike aircraft coming out of Turkey, or coming out of Saudi Arabia, or any of the other Gulf monarchies, or out of Balad in Iraq, or wherever, supporting the Israelis. I mean, that's just not possible. It's not possible. So potentially U.S. Navy and Marine Corps aircraft off of the carriers, but I mean, the idea though that they could do it on their own, I mean, that's wherein you could see with the attack on the consulate some type of reasoning behind it, as reckless as it was. Okay, maybe this was the purpose in it, and maybe the purpose in the attack as well, I should say, was just that they wanted to do it. They just wanted to hurt the Iranians. They just wanted to punch the Iranians in the nose because they felt like they could get away with it. Those are the types of people they are. That's what we're dealing with the Israelis. They're very vindictive. They sneer at international law. They sneer at international opinion. They are incredibly self-righteous. So if they can punch the Iranians in the nose and get away with it, they will. But the idea that they could do a war against Hezbollah without U.S. support, that's just ludicrous.
When you look at King Abdullah from Jordan, when he was talking about this attack on Rafah, he said that Rafah is the red line for us, for Arab countries. Do you think at the end of the day, they would do that?
Oh, I don't think politically it's possible for Israel not to carry out the Rafa campaign for domestic political reasons. Again, this is the opportunity that they've long wanted. They may never get another opportunity like this. It keeps the governing coalition in power, and it fulfills the ideals and aspirations of the Zionists, which is the bulk of not just the Israeli government, but Israeli society. I think the posturing that the Arab states are doing now is because their populations are extremely upset and angry with them. But I can't see the Jordanians or the Egyptians going against the Americans and doing something against Israel. It would cost them too much. The Egyptians get more than $1 billion a year in military assistance from the U.S. There's no way the Egyptian military, which controls Egypt basically, is going to let that go. It's too much of a cash cow for them. They'll find ways to make angry statements. They'll do some type of actions that are ultimately meaningless or inconsequential. And so like we're seeing today with Turkey, with the news that Turkey is basically putting sanctions on Israel. They're no longer going to export a list of goods to Israel, primarily construction materials, also jet fuel and things like that. And good on the Turks for doing that, 6 months later, but good on the Turks for doing it. And the Turks are also the first country to do any type of trade action against Israel over the course of this 6-month genocide. So at least the Turks are willing to do this. What kind of impact will it have? The Israelis not receiving iron bar or electrical wire or concrete or whatever else is in the list of things that the Turks are not going to export to them. That's not going to stop the genocide. It's also not going to have an impact on the Israeli economy for a bit of time, right? I mean, it's not going to have an immediate impact. Turks are big trading partners with the Israelis. That seems to have gotten Erdogan in trouble. People remember a few months ago, Erdogan was in front of those mass rallies. I mean, he had like 1 million people he was speaking to, and he is basically giving speeches that were calls to war. And those calls to war, the Turkish people, well, what came of it? Where's our action, Mr. President? And in recent elections in Turkey, you saw a repudiation of Erdogan and his party because of that. The opposition parties did well because, as the analysts are saying, frustration by the Turkish people towards Turkey's inaction. So it's not surprising that after those elections, you now see the Turkish government saying, Erdogan saying, we're not going to export, and hey, that's how democracy is supposed to work. What you're seeing in response from that, and this is why it's important to talk about this, and this ties into what you're saying about with this question about what will Egypt do, what will Jordan do, what will the Saudis do, et cetera. Israel's immediate response to Turkey's trade restrictions is that we are going to have our own restrictions on Turkey. All right, fine. But we are going to tell the United States to impose restrictions on Turkey. And so this will be very interesting to see. This is very important. Whether or not the United States Congress acts in any way to defend Israel against other nations. And we've seen this in other aspects of American foreign policy before, right? Particularly, let's say, with the International Criminal Court, where the idea of the ICC investigating Israel has been met with sanctions, with the threat of sanctions from the American Congress against the ICC, against their jurors, against their staff, et cetera. So this will be interesting to see whether or not the Israelis really have the leverage and the pull to get the U.S. to act against the Turks on behalf of the Israelis, right? To respond in kind, to put some kind of sanctions on the Turks. Whether or not the Turkish trade, these sanctions by the Turks against Israel really even matter that much, that it will be anything other than just this tiff back and forth. So it's really important what the Turks did today, but whether or not it actually has any meaning, we'll see in the coming weeks. And if it does have any meaning, I would expect to see the American Congress act to protect the Israelis, to punish the Turks, because it's not so much about the Turks' individual actions. It's about the idea that now the Turks have taken this step, will other nations follow? And the danger is that now we're going to, you're seeing other things. You just had the new Irish prime minister get sworn in, and his words towards Israel were very damning. You have later this month, the issue of Palestinian statehood is going to come up before the UN Security Council, and is it going to be the United States by itself vetoing Palestinian statehood? Are we going to see France and Britain, as well as the Japanese and the Maltese and others in the U.S. camp, abandon the U.S. once again? So what Turkey did today was really important. And it speaks to this larger thing of like, what are these other Arab states? What are these other Middle Eastern states doing in terms of actually having, actually acting, right, in a way that would have an effect on the war, on the genocide, as opposed to just putting out, press statements.
You said 68% of Israelis are supporting the Netanyahu administration's actions in Gaza. Are Israelis really understanding in which region they're living right now?
Yeah, I think with the Israeli public, this is the result of decades of religious and militarist ideology that have produced a fortress Israel mentality, that, to hell with the rest of the world. This is ours. This is the consequence of a theocratic government that believes they are God's chosen people, of a media by and large in Israel that follow that narrative, right? And in a sense of entitlement that is then reinforced by decades and decades of violence. And whether or not the actual story of why that violence occurred is told or not doesn't matter. It's just that they feel that they're under threat, so that they are Fortress Israel. They have the backing of the United States, right, along every conceivable line, right, along every type of any way that they could be supported. The United States is there. They feel that's all they need. They are in control of the American political process through their lobbies. Their lobbies are separate from the Israeli government, but the lobby's chief interest, the Israeli lobbies, the American Israeli lobby's interest is in Israel itself. So it doesn't matter if they actually are one and the same or if they're separate, because the goals are the same. I think this is why you saw a couple of weeks ago a schism appear between the Israeli lobbies and Netanyahu, because the Israeli lobbies in the U.S. feel like Netanyahu is tarnishing their project, right? You're making things really difficult for us, Netanyahu, right? And we can get the same, we're going to have the same result that we want, whether you're there, whether it's Benny Gantz, whether it's Yair Lapid, whoever, we're going to get the same result. So I think you have had decades, right? And then you have the creation story of Israel, okay, of course, coming out of the Holocaust, the history of Jews being persecuted around the world, all these things that, fill out the modern understanding of Israelis, of who they are, why they are, how things exist, and why those things are like that. So if the rest of the world is against them, then so be it. That's been the history of our people. So we're just filling out, right, our role. And of course, the two defining elements within Israeli society right now are the ultra-nationalists, the religious nationalists, and then the militarists. Okay, so you look at let me just say this then too. The idea also exists along with that of Fortress Israel, of us against the world, of we'll do what we need to do to fulfill our destiny, essentially, is this idea that we were so close to normalization before with the other Middle Eastern nations. We will get there again. And we understand politics, we understand rhetoric. So we also understand this is what got Erdogan in trouble, right? We also understand that if people like President Erdogan want to stand in front of a million people and yell about how we are war criminals and basically make this cry for war like he's the next coming of Salah ad-Din, but as you know, as long as they're still our third biggest trading partner, what's the big deal? You know, and the same thing too with the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Saudis, right? The Saudis are, we will, and I would bet this too, Nima. Yeah, if I got to bet $1, will the Saudis in the next 5 years normalize relations with Israel, even if Israel has expanded into southern Lebanon and they've completely annexed the West Bank and Gaza is destroyed? Oh yeah, within 5 years, Saudi Arabia will. You know, and that's what I think the Israelis are betting on too, is that these governments around them will do what they need to do to placate their people, but in reality, they will eventually work with us. I think there's also too an idea in Israel that we're not part, and this is. I'm not sure how accurate it is to say it this way, and so forgive me if I'm oversimplifying it. But this idea that we're not part of the Middle East, and that's certainly that we belong more with Europe. And certainly, and I'm not saying they're denying where their geography is or the culture or that they eat falafel or anything like that, right? But this idea of like who's our kinship, right? Where's our political identity more aligned to? Where is our economic concerns more aligned? You know, where are our security partners, right? So they look west, right? They don't look east, they look west. And I think there's a thought that because of this new age, because of the digital age, the way things work now, that they can have these borders and essentially be and the outpost of the West, which is how many people see it, right? So again, this goes back to this idea of fortress Israel. We don't need anyone else. We've got, as long as Germany is willing to send us all these weapons, right? And we know Germany is in the ICJ right now. Nicaragua brought them there, and the Germans just, you know, staying committed to their support of Israel, even as Israel commits genocide. They're seeing that, and they say, as long we don't just have the Americans, but we have Europe's largest economy with us as well. The British are going to do whatever they need to do to make it seem as if their empire still exists. You know, I was watching earlier today, Nima, press conference with David Cameron and Tony Blinken, and I mean the self-righteousness of David Cameron just really illuminates it and really defines the wreckage of the British Empire, right? They don't even know that their empire is destroyed if you listen to, you know, they don't even know that their empire ceased to exist decades ago if you're to listen to David Cameron, you know, and that's what the Israelis are banking on, you know, self-righteous, I won't say it, but people like David Cameron who are going to continue to commit their countries to Israel, you know, for a variety of reasons.
If the US Congress go with a plan to impose some sort of sanctions on Turkey to respond to these restrictions on Israel, do you think how much they're willing to do that in the
Oh,
United
I
States?
think the American Congress is going to follow the lead of the Israeli lobbies. So, like you and I could go in there, and I'm sure many people in DC, you know, even those who you and I are continually against in our understanding of the world and our opinion of things, many will go in there, representative of the foreign policy community, including, I think, this administration, and say to the Congress, look, don't push the Turks too hard. They are a key member of NATO. They are a key trading partner for us. They, you know, all the geopolitical reasons. Turkey, you know, has been an important part of world politics, military strategy, world economy forever. Because look at where it's at on the map, right? I mean, so, but the American Congress doesn't care. The American Congress has got very few, I don't think really any members that you would describe as geopolitical geopolitical thinkers. Very few that you could put the term statesman or stateswoman on, right? I mean, so what they will do is that they will say, look, this is what AIPAC is telling me to do. Look, I mean, I need that support from the Democratic majority for Israel, you know, otherwise they're going to primary me. You know what I mean? So they will do what the Israeli lobby tells them to do. You also have to remember that many of the members of American Congress, some of them are just on the take, right? And they are like so many other issues in the United States, healthcare and pharmaceuticals, agriculture, fossil fuels, the military industrial complex, right? These special interests dominate decision making and dominate policy, dominate appropriations in the U.S. Congress because we have a legalized system of bribery here, right? So they're able to capture what the Congress does because of the way our political system works with regards to money. So there are many members of Congress who are like that, I believe, with regards to Israel, where if you took the money away, they would probably be agnostic about the whole thing because they couldn't care less, right? They're so self-absorbed, they're so ahistorical, they're so ignorant. But there are also many members of American Congress who really do believe in Israel, who are Zionists. It's like there are many Americans, and that's one of the things we have to remember about Joe Biden. Say everything we want about the political calculations. Will he lose votes? And is that more important than him losing the support of the Israeli lobby in terms of the 2024 election? But we cannot ever forget that there might not be a bigger Zionist in Washington, D.C. than Joe Biden. And what he believes he's doing in supporting Israel is what he actually believes. And there are many members of Congress who do believe that. They are American exceptionalists. They believe in this fairy tale of good versus evil, this Manichaean struggle where the United States is God's chosen nation or indispensable nation. You will hear these people say that kind of thing. There are two nations that God blesses, Israel and the United States, right? I mean, I've got about 5 Bibles in my house. None of them reference the United States, but this is what these people actually believe. And so, whether or not people who have a good thought or two can talk to these members of Congress and say, don't push the Turks too hard, because there are, as you were saying, Nima, other options for the Turks. And the Turks are important for us for a number of reasons, diplomatically, militarily, economically. So we'll see. And I think maybe this restrictions on these 54 items really don't mount to much, really is not big of a concern. Maybe the Israelis are posturing, or maybe the Israelis are serious and they're going to call in the American Congress to punish the Turks for having the temerity to try and do something about Israel's genocide.